Amelia, they're here." My voice cracked on her name, a dry whisper in the sudden stillness of our living room. Outside, the world was anything but still. Red and blue lights flashed in a frantic, silent rhythm, painting our walls in strokes of panic. They swept across the family photos on the mantel, across the couch we'd saved up for, across the dream home we had poured every last bit of ourselves into. The distant wail of sirens grew closer, a rising scream that seemed to tear through the peaceful quiet of Cedar Creek. Police were coming, and they were coming for my wife. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Out on the driveway, standing under the pale glow of the street lamp, was the source of it all, Carol Peterson. She was a statue of suburban fury, her face a mask of indignation, the cell phone she'd just used still clutched in her hand like a weapon. And then there was my Amelia. She just stood there, next to her counter-issued Ford Explorer. She was still in a full sheriff's uniform, the dark fabric a stark contrast to the flashing lights. Her back was ramrod straight, her hands at her sides, perfectly calm. There was no defiance in her stance, no anger, just a profound, unshakable stillness that was more powerful than any shout Carol could ever muster. In the chaos Carol had summoned, my wife was a pillar of impossible calm. It was the calm of a person who had faced down true evil in her career, and knew this. This was something else entirely. This was petty. This was personal, and it was utterly insane, because the 2 squad cars, now screeching to a halt at the end of our driveway, were here to respond to a call about the single most powerful law enforcement officer in the entire county. They were here to confront their own boss. How in God's name did it come to this? It started, as these things so often do, with something laughably small. It wasn't about a 911 call or a midnight confrontation. It began on a quiet Tuesday morning, just 3 months after we'd moved in. I was in the kitchen, grinding coffee beans, the rich aroma filling our new home. I smiled as I saw Amelia's patrol car pull into the driveway. It was 7 a.m., the end of a grueling 12-hour night shift for her. I could see the exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders as she cut the engine. I knew her routine by heart. She'd leave the squad car there for 15 minutes tops, just long enough to come inside, shed the heavy uniform and duty belt, grab her gym bag and civilian clothes, and feel human again before heading back to the office in her own car to finish up paperwork. To me, that patrol car in our driveway was a symbol of pride, a quiet reminder of the incredible, dangerous work my wife did every single day. I never imagined it could be seen as anything else. That's when the knock came. It wasn't a friendly, welcome to the neighborhood kind of knock. It was 3 sharp, imperious raps that vibrated through the door, the kind of knock that demanded, not requested, your attention. I opened it to find Carol Peterson. She was the president of our homeowners association, a fact she seemed to carry with more gravity than a Supreme Court justice. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her polo shirt was neatly pressed, and she held a clipboard to her chest like it was a shield. "Mr. Hayes, I presume?" she said, her voice thin and sharp. She didn't wait for an answer, instead pointing a manicured finger towards Amelia's car. Section 4. Article 3 of the Cedar Creek HOA bylaws expressly prohibits the parking of commercial vehicles on residential property. I tried for a neighborly smile. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Peterson. I understand your concern, but that's my wife's patrol car. She's a county sheriff. She just finished a 12-hour shift, and she's only stopping in for a few minutes to change. It's standard police procedure." Carol's eyes narrowed. "I'm not interested in procedure, Mr. Hayes. In Cedar Creek, we have rules. They apply to everyone, equally." She ignored my explanation completely, as if I hadn't spoken at all. She made a sharp, deliberate mark on the paper on her clipboard before tearing a sheet off with a flourish. "This is your official warning and a $50 fine for the initial violation. she said, thrusting the paper into my hand. The number $50 was circled in an aggressive red ink. The next infraction will be 200. I trust we have an understanding. Before I could form another word, she turned on her heel and marched away. Her mission accomplished. I closed the door, stunned. A few moments later, Amelia came out of our bedroom, dressed in yoga pants and a simple t-shirt, looking more like the girl I'd fallen in love with than the sheriff on the ticket. I showed her the paper. She didn't get angry. I saw something far worse in her eyes. Pure, unadulterated exhaustion. She took the ticket, rubbed her temples and let out a long, weary sigh. "Just pay it, Liam," she said, her voice soft. "Please, I just spent half the night dealing with a multi-car pile-up on the interstate. The last thing I have the energy for is a war with the HOA president." So I paid it. I wrote the check that very day, thinking a silly $50 payment would be the end of it. We were the new neighbors, after all. We wanted peace. How naive I was. Because that $50 ticket wasn't about a car in a driveway. It was the first shot fired in a war we didn't even know we were in. A war that, I would later discover, had started years before we ever set foot in Cedar Creek. We paid the $50 fine, thinking that would be the end of it. We were the new neighbors, after all. We wanted peace. How naive I was, because that $50 ticket wasn't about a car in a driveway. It was the first shot fired in a war we didn't even know we were in. A war that, I would later discover, had started years before we ever set foot in Cedar Creek. The first real sign that this wasn't going to go away came a few days later. Amelia had spent a Saturday planting a small rose garden along our walkway. It was her way of decompressing, of bringing life and color to our new space. On Monday morning, I walked out to get the newspaper and found 3 of the new bushes trampled, their stems snapped, delicate pink petals crushed into the dirt. There were no footprints, no obvious signs of vandalism, just destruction. It was petty, it was deniable, but we both knew it was a message. Amelia just looked at it, her jaw tight. "Don't say anything, Liam," she said quietly. "Don't give her the satisfaction." So I didn't. I just replanted the roses. Then came the emails. They started arriving every few days, sent from Carol Peterson's official HOA president email address to the entire Cedar Creek mailing list. The subject lines were always dramatic, written in all caps. "Urgent community bylaw violation at 124 Cedar Creek Lane." Or, "Reminder, rules regarding commercial vehicles." Inside each email was a photo of Amelia's patrol car in our driveway. Carol must have been taking them from her window across the street. In each photo, she had used a crude drawing tool to circle the vehicle in a thick, accusatory red line, as if it were evidence in a murder trial. The text was always cloyingly polite, dripping with passive aggression. "It has come to our attention that some residents may be unaware of our community's standards. These rules are in place to protect our property values and ensure a harmonious living environment for everyone." She never used our names. She didn't have to. Everyone knew who lived at 124 Cedar Creek Lane. The war had gone public. It escalated again the following week. I was washing dishes, looking out the kitchen window, when I saw her, Carol. She was standing across the street, partially hidden behind a large oak tree, and she was holding a stopwatch. A real, honest-to-God stopwatch, hanging from a lanyard around her neck like an Olympic official. She was timing Amelia's brief stops at home, down to the second. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was beyond petty. This was obsessive. This was a woman with far too much time on her hands and a deep, unsettling well of malice. "Amy, you have to see this," I said, my voice low. Amelia came and stood beside me. She watched Carol for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She didn't look angry. She looked analytical, like she was observing a strange and unpredictable new species. "She's building a file, Liam." Amelia said, her voice clinical. "She's documenting everything to create a pattern of behavior. It's what people do when they're preparing for a bigger attack." "So what do we do?" I asked, frustration rising in my throat. "We can't just let her stand out there and stalk you." "Yes, we can," Amelia countered, turning away from the window. "Right now, she's just a neighborhood nuisance. The moment I use my position to confront her, even in the slightest way, I become the story. County Sheriff harasses concerned HOA president." I can see the headline now. We do nothing. We give her nothing. She'll get bored eventually. But she didn't get bored. She got bolder. The social climate of Cedar Creek began to change. The friendly waves from neighbors walking their dogs became hesitant, then stopped altogether. Conversations at the community mailboxes would die down the moment I approached. We were being isolated, cast as the problem residents. Carol, it turned out, was a master of manipulation. She was weaving a narrative, and we were the villains. I found out how bad it was one afternoon when I ran into our neighbor, Bob, at the grocery store. Bob was a friendly retiree who had been the first to welcome us to the neighborhood with a plate of brownies. Now, he seemed to shrink when he saw me, his eyes darting away. "Hey Bob, how are you?" I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Fine, Liam, just fine," he mumbled, staring intently at a display of avocados. He practically sprinted away with his cart. The message was clear. Carol had gotten to him. She'd gotten to all of them. She was painting us as arrogant government officials who thought we were above the rules. She was the brave citizen, just trying to uphold the standards of their peaceful community. And her tactics were getting darker. One Thursday morning, I went to get the mail. I reached into the cool metal box, and my fingers brushed against something small, soft, and unnervingly still. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. Taking a deep breath, I peered inside. Lying on top of our letters was a small dead sparrow. Its neck was bent at an unnatural angle. There was no blood, no sign of a cat. It had been placed there, intentionally. I felt sick. My hand started to shake. This was a threat. A clear, vile, mafioso-style message delivered to our front door. That night I confronted Amelia. I was past trying to be patient. "A dead bird, Amy. She put a dead bird in our mailbox. This isn't about parking anymore. This isn't about fines. This is a threat. We have to do something." Amelia looked at the picture I'd taken of the bird, her face pale. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes, quickly masked by anger. "I know, Liam. I know," she said, her voice tight. "But what can we do? We can't prove it was her. There are no cameras on that part of the street. If I call in my deputies to investigate, it looks like I'm using county resources for a personal vendetta. She's smart, damn it. She knows exactly how far she can push, staying just on the edge of the law. So we just take it? We let her terrorize us in our own home?" I was practically shouting now. "No," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "We document, we save every email. We write down every incident with dates and times. We build our own file. When she finally makes a real mistake, a mistake we can prove, we'll be ready." The final escalation, the one that broke through Amelia's ironclad control, came 2 weeks later. It started with a new addition to Carol's house across the street, a small black security camera mounted under the eaves of her roof. It wasn't pointed at her own door or her own yard. It was pointed directly at our house. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of our driveway, our front door, our living room window. That little black dome was a malevolent eye, watching our every move. When we left for work, when we came home, when we had guests. We were living in a fishbowl, and Carol Peterson was the person tapping on the glass. The rage I felt was a physical thing, a hot pressure behind my eyes. But even that wasn't the breaking point. The real breaking point came from an unlikely source. Mrs. Gable, the quiet woman who lived 2 doors down, knocked on our door one evening. She was a widow in her 70s, and she looked terrified. She was clutching her phone so tightly, her knuckles were white. "Mr. Hayes," she whispered, refusing to step inside. I'm so sorry to bother you, but you need to see this. What Carol is doing, it's not right." She showed me her phone. On the screen was a photo, a close-up of the front tire of Amelia's patrol car, and right next to the tire, on the pavement of our driveway, was a small, smeared pile of white powder. The photo was grainy, clearly taken at night, but the implication was sickeningly clear. She showed this to a few of us in her concerned citizens group. Mrs. Gable stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "She didn't say what it was. She just said she was worried, that your wife seemed unstable. She suggested maybe someone should make an anonymous call to the sheriff's department about a possible drug problem." I stared at the image, and a cold, clear fury, unlike anything I had ever felt, washed over me. The dead bird was a threat. The camera was an invasion. This was an attempt to destroy my wife's life, her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for since she was a 20-year-old rookie, all because of a parking spot. I thanked Mrs. Gable, my voice barely a whisper. I assured her she had done the right thing, and that she would be kept out of it. Then I closed the door and waited for Amelia to come home. I didn't say a word when she walked in. I just handed her my phone with the picture on the screen. She looked at it. Her face, already weary from the day, went completely blank. The professional mask she wore so well was gone. The analytical observer was gone. The patient wife was gone. I watched as something inside her shifted, something hard and cold and ancient taking its place. She set her keys down on the counter with a quiet, deliberate click. She looked from the phone, then up to me. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "This is what she's doing, Amy," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "This is an attempt to frame you. A felony. This ends. It ends now." Amelia was silent for a full minute, her gaze distant. I could almost see the gears turning in her brilliant mind, the years of training, of strategy, of seeing the very worst of humanity, all coming to a single, sharp point. Finally, she looked at me, and I saw a look I had only ever seen once before, when she was describing the moments before a major raid. It was the look of a hunter who has finally, definitively spotted her prey. "You're right," she said, her voice low and devoid of all emotion. "She's not just a neighborhood bully. She's not just a stalker. She's a threat, an active threat, and you don't ignore a threat. You neutralize it." She took a deep breath. "Okay, Liam, no more waiting, no more turning the other cheek, no more documenting from the sidelines." She walked over to her briefcase and pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. "We're going to do this by the book," she said, the words sharp and precise. "My book. We are going to launch a full-spectrum investigation into Carol Peterson and the entire Cedar Creek HOA. We're going to look at her finances, her history, her associates. We're going to find out what is really driving this, and then we are going to dismantle her, piece by piece, using nothing but the absolute, crushing weight of the law." I knew in that moment that the war had changed. We were no longer on the defensive, and Carol Peterson had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had finally, after weeks of provocation, managed to get the full, undivided attention of the county sheriff. The decision had been made. We were going on the offensive, but a war fought with subpoenas, financial records, and legal motions is a quiet one. It takes time. In the week that followed Amelia's declaration, an eerie silence fell over Cedar Creek. The accusatory emails from Carol stopped. The stopwatch was gone from her post across the street. The little black camera on her house was still there. A silent sentinel, but her active daily harassment had ceased. For a foolish moment, I allowed a sliver of hope. Maybe she knew she was being watched. Maybe the simple, quiet resolve in Amelia's eyes was enough to make her back down. Maybe the storm had passed. It hadn't. It had just been gathering strength, pulling in all the darkness and fury for one final catastrophic strike. It happened on a Friday. One of those long, draining weeks where the weekend feels less like a celebration, and more like a desperate gasp for air. Amelia pulled into the driveway just as the sun was bleeding into a bruised purple twilight. She sat in the car for a full minute, and I knew she was just gathering the strength to unbuckle her seatbelt. I had a cold beer waiting for her on the counter. All I wanted was to give her a moment of peace. But peace was not on the agenda. As Amelia finally stepped out of her patrol car, weariness etched on her face. A figure emerged from the deepening shadows of the yard next door. It was Carol Peterson. She moved with a strange, jerky energy, not the usual stiff-backed indignation, but something more frayed, more unhinged. "Evening, Carol," Amelia said, her voice tired but even. She closed her car door with a solid thud. Carol didn't answer. She just marched to the edge of our driveway, placing herself between Amelia and our front door. Her arms were crossed, her stance a bizarre combination of defiance and instability. "You think you're so powerful, don't you?" Carol spat, her voice a low hiss. "In that uniform, driving that car. You think you can just roll into our neighborhood and do whatever you damn well please." "Carol, I'm not doing this tonight," Amelia said, holding up a hand. "I'm tired. I'm going inside." She took a step forward, and Carol took a step to block her. "No, no, you don't get to dismiss me. I know who you are. I know what you do to people. You ruin lives. You think you're a hero, but you're just a bully with a badge." Her voice was rising now, cracking with an emotion that went far beyond a dispute over parking. This was raw, venomous hatred. Neighbors began to peek out of their blinds. A man walking his dog paused at the end of the street. I stood in the doorway of our home, my body frozen, every muscle screaming at me to run out there, to stand between them, but I knew that was the worst possible thing I could do. It would only feed her narrative, make me look like a threat. I had to trust Amelia. I had to trust her training. That's when Carol pulled out her phone. My first thought was that she was just recording, trying to bait Amelia into saying something she could use later. But she wasn't pointing the camera. She was dialing. And then, in a voice that was suddenly, chillingly, a performance, a trembling, tearful plea, she spoke into the phone. Her words carried clearly across the quiet evening air, each one a dagger. "Yes, 911, please help me," she cried, a fabricated sob catching in her throat. "I'm at 124 Cedar Creek Lane. There's a woman here. She's impersonating a police officer. She's in a uniform, but she's threatening me. She's completely unstable." My blood ran cold. Impersonating an officer? "Yes, she's armed!" Carol shrieked into the phone, her eyes locked on Amelia with pure triumphant malice. "She has a gun! I'm terrified! She's going to hurt me! Please, you have to send someone right now! Hurry!" She disconnected the call, and she smiled. A small, twisted, victorious smile. I finally understood. This was her endgame. This wasn't about getting Amelia fired. This was about getting her arrested, or worse. She had created the most dangerous possible scenario for a police response. A report of an armed, unstable individual impersonating law enforcement. She knew exactly what kind of response that would trigger. It was only a minute later, but it felt like an eternity. First, the distant wail. Then, the piercing scream of sirens tearing our quiet street apart. 2 squad cars, lights blazing, came careening around the corner and screeched to a halt, their tires smoking on the asphalt. Doors flew open. 2 young officers, their faces grim and set with adrenaline, emerged. They took positions behind their doors, using them as cover, just as they had been trained. And then I saw it. The moment that will be burned into my memory forever. The officer on the right, a young man whose name I later learned was Evans, raised his service weapon. He brought it up with both hands, his stance firm, and aimed it directly at the center of my wife's chest. Time stopped. The sound of my own breathing vanished. The world narrowed to that single terrifying image, a police officer, a kid really, pointing a deadly weapon at the love of my life. "Hands!" Officer Evans' voice boomed, sharp and cracking with tension. "Let me see your hands! Put them on your head! Now!" I saw Amelia's shoulders rise and fall with a single deep breath. And then she did something that defied every instinct for self-preservation. She didn't argue. She didn't shout her title. She didn't make a single sudden move. Slowly, deliberately, she complied. She raised her hands from her sides, fingers spread wide to show they were empty, and placed them carefully on top of her head, just as he had commanded. She was de-escalating. She was protecting the young officers from making a fatal mistake. She was following protocol, even when she was the one at the wrong end of a gun. Only when she was completely still, a non-threatening figure under the glare of their headlights, did she speak. Her voice cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't loud, but it was perfectly clear, infused with an authority that years of command had given her. "Officer," she began, her voice calm and even. "My name is Amelia Hayes. My badge number is 001. I am the sheriff of this county." Silence. A profound, echoing silence, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. I saw the flicker of confusion in Officer Evans's eyes. His gun didn't waver, but the absolute certainty in his posture faltered. The other officer, Miller, had his hand on his own weapon. But he froze, his head cocked, as if he couldn't possibly have heard her right. Amelia held their gaze. "I am ordering you to lower your weapon, Officer Evans, and I want you to get your shift supervisor, Lieutenant Davis, on the radio. Tell him Sheriff Hayes has a situation at 124 Cedar Creek Lane and that I require his presence immediately. Do it now." The authority in her voice was absolute. It wasn't a request. It was a command from the top of the entire chain. I watched as Officer Evans's face went from confused to stunned to utterly, horrifyingly pale. The realization washed over him like a physical wave. His arms trembled, and he slowly, shakily lowered his firearm. He looked at his partner, his eyes wide with a dawning panic. Across the street, Carol Peterson's victorious smile had vanished. Her face was a canvas of disbelief. The trap she had so carefully laid had just snapped shut. On her. The officer's fumbling voice on his radio was barely a whisper, but I heard it. "Dispatch, get me Lieutenant Davis. Tell him the sheriff needs him. On scene, immediately." The silence that followed the young officer's panicked radio call was thicker than any sound. The flashing red and blue lights seemed to pulse in time with the hammering in my chest. Officer Evans stood frozen, his firearm now lowered but still held in a white-knuckled grip, his face a mask of dawning horror. Across the street, Carol Peterson's mouth was slightly agape, the gears in her mind visibly grinding as she tried to comprehend how a perfect dramatic trap had just backfired so spectacularly. Amelia was the first to move. She slowly lowered her hands from her head, her movements calm and deliberate. She looked at the two young officers, and I saw no anger in her expression, only a quiet, weary professionalism. "It's all right, son," she said to Officer Evans, her voice steady. "You were responding to a report of a potentially armed individual. You followed your training. You did your job based on the information you were given." The relief that washed over the young man's face was so profound, it was almost painful to watch. He nodded, unable to speak. Amelia then turned her gaze, cold and sharp as glass, to Carol Peterson. Carol, seeing the tide turn against her, tried to bluster. "He pointed a gun at her. You all saw it. I was in fear for my life. She was threatening me." But the performance was over. The words rang hollow in the suddenly quiet street. Nobody was buying it. Just then, another squad car pulled up, this one without the frantic sirens. A man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and a lieutenant's bars on his collar stepped out. Lieutenant Davis. He was one of Amelia's most trusted senior officers, a man who had seen everything the streets had to offer. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. The two shaken junior officers, Carol's frantic posturing, and his sheriff standing calmly in her own driveway. He walked over to Amelia, no salutes, no ceremony, just a nod of deep professional respect. "Sheriff, Lieutenant," Amelia replied, her voice clipped and official. Thank you for the quick response." She gestured with her chin toward Carol. "Ms. Peterson here just made a 911 call reporting an armed officer impersonator. As you can see, that report was fabricated." Davis's gaze shifted to Carol, his eyes hard as stone. "Lieutenant," Amelia's voice was devoid of all emotion now, pure command. "Please place Ms. Peterson under arrest for filing a false police report and misuse of the 911 emergency system. Read her rights. I want everything by the book." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around Carol Peterson's wrists was one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard. Her blustering dissolved into a sputtering stream of denials as she was led to the back of a squad car, her reign of suburban terror ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, ignominious slam of a car door. The days that followed were a whirlwind of official procedure. The investigation was swift and overwhelming. The evidence against Carol was ironclad. There was the pristine audio recording of her 911 call, where her voice, analyzed by the department's technicians, showed all the telltale signs of feigned distress. And then there was the crown jewel, the high-definition body camera footage from Officer Evans. It showed the entire encounter from his perspective. Amelia's calm, non-threatening posture versus Carol's escalating, aggressive screaming. It was a masterclass in de-escalation from my wife and a portrait of a woman completely unhinged in Carol. But for Amelia, one question remained. Why? Why risk a felony charge? Why the obsessive, personal hatred? It was too much for a simple parking dispute. Late one night, about a week after the incident, I found her in our home office. The only light was the glow of her laptop screen. I set a cup of coffee down beside her and saw she was staring at an old case file. On the screen was the mugshot of a young man in his 20s with a smug, defiant look on his face. "Liam," she said softly, her eyes not leaving the screen. "Look at this." I leaned in. I didn't recognize the man. "His name is Daniel Peterson," Amelia said, her voice flat. "He's Carol Peterson's son." She scrolled down through the file. 8 years ago, when I was still a detective in the financial crimes unit, I was the lead investigator on his case. He ran a sophisticated embezzlement scheme, defrauding elderly retirees out of their life savings. A real piece of work. We built a rock-solid case against him. She pointed to a line in the report. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. He just got out on parole 6 months ago. And just like that, everything clicked into place. Every hostile glare, every passive-aggressive email, the trampled roses, the dead bird, the obsessive timing with the stopwatch, the venom in her voice. It was never about where a car was parked. It was never about HOA bylaws. It was about revenge. In Carol Peterson's twisted mind, Amelia wasn't a public servant. She was the woman who had taken her son away. And for the past few months, she had been trying, in her own malicious way, to return the favor by taking away Amelia's career, her peace, and her freedom. The hatred wasn't born in our driveway. It had been simmering for nearly a decade, just waiting for a target to appear, and we had, in our search for a quiet life, moved directly into its path. Knowing the truth didn't bring peace, not at first. It brought a chilling clarity. To realize we had moved into a home that was, to our neighbor, nothing more than a new battleground for an old war. It was a profoundly unsettling feeling. It was never about us. We were just ghosts in her personal tragedy, stand-ins for a system she blamed for the loss of her son. The hatred that had felt so random and chaotic now had a name, a history. It was the deep, twisted grief of a mother who couldn't accept her own child's guilt. The legal fallout for Carol Peterson was swift and decisive. With the damning evidence of the 911 call, the body camera footage, and the testimony from other neighbors like Mrs. Gable, who finally felt safe enough to speak up, Carol had no defense. She pleaded no contest to the primary charges. The judge gave her 3 years of probation, a hefty fine to cover the cost of the emergency response, and mandated psychological counseling. Most importantly for us, he issued a permanent restraining order, barring her from coming within 500 yards of me or Amelia. 2 months later, a for sale sign was hammered into her front lawn. And just like that, she was gone. As for the 2 young officers, Evans and Miller, Amelia made sure their careers weren't derailed by Carol's malicious act. She called them into her office for a private meeting. I wasn't there, but she told me about it later. She didn't yell or reprimand them. She walked them through the incident, using their own body cam footage as a training tool. She praised them for following protocol in a high-risk scenario, but also coached them on recognizing signs of a fabricated report. She turned a moment of potential disaster into a lesson in leadership and discernment. It was pure Amelia. She didn't just enforce the law, she cultivated the people who upheld it. With Carol gone, a strange vacuum was left in Cedar Creek. Her oppressive reign as HOA president had ended so abruptly that no one knew what to do next. The old HOA, so tied to her identity, simply dissolved. For a few weeks there were no rules, no passive-aggressive emails, no fear. And then something wonderful began to happen. It started with a flyer taped to the community mailbox, written in simple black marker. Community BBQ, Saturday my place. Bring a dish to share. It was signed by Bob, the very same neighbor who had avoided my gaze in the grocery store. That Saturday, the park at the center of our neighborhood was filled with people. The air, once thick with suspicion, now smelled of charcoal and freshly cut grass. Kids were laughing and chasing each other, their shouts joyful and carefree. For the first time, I saw our neighbors not as potential spies for Carol, but as they truly were, regular people who had been manipulated by fear. Bob came over and clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes meeting mine without hesitation. Liam, he said, his voice full of genuine remorse, I just want to say, we're all real sorry for how things went. That woman, she had us all wound up. We let fear get the better of us. It won't happen again. Mrs. Gable brought over her famous potato salad, giving me a warm, knowing smile. One by one, people came up to us, to me and Amelia, not to talk about what happened, but just to talk. About their gardens, their grandkids, the local sports team. It was simple. It was normal. It was everything we had hoped for when we first moved here. Amelia was just Amy that day. She laughed and chatted with everyone. No badge, no uniform. Just another neighbor enjoying a sunny afternoon. Tonight, as I write this, I'm sitting on our front porch. The sun is setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep purple. The air is cool and quiet. Amelia is sitting beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, a cup of tea warming her hands. Her patrol car is parked in the driveway. She got home about 15 minutes ago from a long day. She's decompressing, just like she always does. In a few minutes she'll go inside, change, and we'll make dinner together. The car doesn't bother anyone now. If anything, its presence is a quiet comfort, a symbol that one of our own is watching over us. I look at my wife, at the incredible, resilient woman beside me. I went into this ordeal thinking her strength was in her badge and her authority. But I was wrong. Her true strength is in her unshakable integrity, her quiet grace under pressure, and her profound belief that doing the right thing, the right way, is the only way. She faced down hatred not with hatred, but with the calm, steady, and unbreakable force of the law. Justice isn't always a dramatic courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's the quiet sound of neighbors laughing at a barbecue. Sometimes it's the simple, earned peace of watching a sunset from your own front porch, free from fear. And sometimes it's looking at the person you love and realizing you've only just begun to understand the depths of their strength. The war is over. We finally found our quiet life,